very comfortable coming to Uganda while fleeing some of the conflicts in their countries. Joining me for this particular discussion is the district chairperson for Kisoro, who is Abel Bizimana, and also Joshua Mukisa William, a lawyer, and of course a member of the National Christian Students Association, for the latest perspective when it comes to refugee issues. Gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A very good morning.
Good morning.
First and foremost, we are hearing reports of a renewed surge of refugees from the Democratic Republic of Congo. This is a story that has been ongoing time and again. We know just about every 6 months there is going to be something happening in the DRC, and immediately bullets are fired. For example, what we see are women, children carrying everything they can carry, from mattresses, saucepans, goats, sheep, and we see those pictures of people rolling in. Let me first come to the district chairperson of Kisoro, because this is one of the districts that are affected heavily when this influx occurs by way of the Congolese coming over to Uganda. What is the state of affairs right now before we delve into what it means to manage them?
Why I'm here actually is to give the picture of what is on the ground.
That's right.
Kisoro is the largest entry of refugees from DRC. That is a fact.
That's right.
Number two, the refugees who come, they have a face. They are not just refugees. We are talking of children, women. Men are not there. Either they are fighting or they are somewhere protecting their properties. The first face you see of refugees,
Women and children.
women, children with dirty clothes. Some are injured, others really are worried, hopelessness. That is the picture. But it seems people, when they talk of refugees, it's like another type of seed in agriculture. These are humans.
Okay.
Number two, the refugee issue in Congo is perennial. It occurs, it's endemic like malaria. So you expect that every other time there will be a conflict and people will flee. But the response of our own government and response of UNHCR now is either overstretched or some people are sleeping on their job. Then I want to tell you we have 3 areas of intercourse of this issue. We have comprehensive, what they call comprehensive refugee response framework, CRRF. This is where we expect also people of Kisoro to benefit from hosting these refugees. So we are talking of newcomers as if there are no people they are finding in the community.
In the communities they
we
go
are talking
to.
of issues of settling people in settled communities who have challenges of land. You know, Bafumbira are the biggest migrants in the whole country. People who are struggling to make wealth in operation wealth creation. People who are having their schools, their health facilities, their places of worship occupied. And seems nobody cares to listen to us as Bafumbira. The focus is on refugees. But again, I am now, you know, I'm a chairman, also a politician, but also a PhD student at Makerere University. And my focus is public health in those people left behind, because there is a slogan, leaving nobody behind. These people who are refugees are treated now not as other refugees were being treated before. Either the UNHCR is not capable, there is no money, or OPM also is struggling to put things together. But up to now, as I said, there is a lift between UNHCR and OPM, and that lift is causing some kind of chaos in management of refugees in Kisoro.
All right, that's a very grim picture of the situation there, and also opens up the debate for so many aspects regarding this particular question. But before we delve into exactly what is causing the rift between the UNHCR and perhaps the Office of the Prime Minister, Mr. Mukisa, the refugee question in the region is one that has been glorified for the country. We are touted as one of the countries that are open to receiving refugees, so much so that the entire world now knows that we can shift some refugees to a certain part of Africa, the latest being Rwanda, but of course that coming on the backdrop of the good relations that Uganda had created in terms of intercepting some of the refugees that are failing to find spaces or homes across the world. He says quite a lot for this, and we shall be, of course, handling what he says. But just give me your view of where we find ourselves, especially when it comes to what appears to be the latest conflict away from another conflict.
So, looking at the issue of refugees, the refugee crisis in DRC, in Africa, but also globally.
Yes.
We understand that there are many players, there are many causes, and there are effects. But what is notable in the DRC region is the role of warlords. Because in every crisis, there are people that stand to benefit, either politically or economically. And DRC has a number of natural resources, mineral resources, that these warlords always look at tapping into whenever people are evicted from their territories, from their land, from their property. And that is why you see that since the 70s, since the times of King Leopold, DRC seems to be in constant conflict. And now it has been renewed. You know, with the COVID pandemic, we find people are affected by health concerns, but also the war concerns. And that is why you see that the Organization of African Unity, the African Union now, adopted a protocol spreading the definition of who amounted to a refugee, including those people that had been violently evicted because of external aggressive action. And we have internally displaced persons, because when you look at the crisis in DRC, it's not just the 1.6 million people that have been evicted in 2022. These numbers are quite high if you look at the history of conflict and chaos within the region. Uganda currently has 1.4 million refugees it is taking care of. But the strain on the resources is unparalleled. Because you see, we have health, we have education, and we have water. In Nyakabande, efforts have been made to create housing. With the Refugee Act that was enacted in 2006, the government has made effort to give these refugees land so that they can set up themselves, build their houses, build businesses. We have seen the World Food Program coming up to create a pool of funding and grants to refugees to enable them carry out their operations here because of Uganda's policy of self-reliance. So Uganda says refugees will come, but instead of them waiting for donor funding, they will participate in their own self-realization.
That's right.
And this also creates an issue, because you find the natives, the people in Uganda ask, we need something to set ourselves up. But we have the refugees coming in and they're setting themselves up and even performing better than us.
That's right.
So an issue comes in. How is the European Union, how are members of the UNHCR going to deal with the issue of helping refugees versus the members of the local communities in which these refugees find themselves?
Allow me ask the question there, because your two submissions reveal something very fundamentally wrong happening, especially from the key stakeholders, government and UNHCR or the donor community. At this point in time, what is the law governing refugee management? For example, if 1,000 flock into a particular area of Kisoro or any other part of the country, what is the immediate action that is taken either by the district authorities or the Office of the Prime Minister on the part of government? How does this roll out? Could you just take us through that?
So the laws governing refugees, first is the 1951 Refugee Convention. And we have the 1979 Protocol. We also have the Organization of African Unity articles that were made. But Uganda has a Refugee Act. And this tries to harmonize all these laws together. And what it provides is that for refugees or asylum seekers, as long as they come into the country and the country believes that they are going to seek for formal recognition as refugees, they can be exempted from either pursuing, from either being litigated or sued, because there's that requirement where they can be sued because they're staying in the country illegally. And then we have the principle of non-refoulement. So this one provides that if refugees have come, asylum seekers are in the country, and they have the belief that they cannot attain protection from the areas where they come from, back home, they should not be sent there. Because we saw this problem happening during the 1948, you know, before we had the UNHCR formally coming in with the Nansen Initiative and the United Nations Human Rights Commission for Refugees in Germany. We saw the International Refugee Organization by the American states, and then a rift with the Russian communities, where the Russians were claiming that these refugees that resulted from the war now cannot claim that they are still refugees, because the situation that caused them to leave their countries has come to an end. So it has seceded, the cessation clause, and that is affecting some of the refugees currently, like the Rwandese refugees. But Uganda has made an effort to ensure that as long as those refugees are in the country, we understand the source of their disgruntlement, we understand the conflict, where they're coming from, we observe that it's still there, we're not going to kick them out. We will let them stay here for about a period of 2 years. And then we have the application to become a refugee, which provides for a 90-day period. So a refugee comes into the country, and then within 3 months, they know whether they have been granted the refugee status or not.
Let's ask the district chairperson, because he is dealing with the influx on perhaps a 3 months basis, more like every 3 months you're grappling with a few people coming in. What are the ordinances?
Talk of thousands.
Thousands, okay. What are the ordinances in place at district level, and what other support laws from either the central government or within the framework of the donor family, especially as led by UNHCR, and UNHCR helps you manage that process? Who becomes a refugee or ascertained to be one, and what period of time does that take?
For us as Kisoro, we don't have our own laws, because
you don't have district laws?
We are operating as government under office of the Prime Minister. It is the face of government. And OPM and government, they signed those protocols he has mentioned. They are member of the frameworks. For example, the framework I've told you, the Comprehensive Refugee Response Framework, CRF.
That's right.
Uganda is part of the Global Pact on Refugees. So we don't want to invent the wheel. What we want is to operationalize those laws. The challenge, therefore, we have is that when OPM is in Kisoro and creating face of government, we are mandated as local government to join OPM, then as one unit face the international community that is participating in the response, that is UNHCR. And then UNHCR has partners, but it doesn't work alone. Actually, I want to be grateful to people like Red Cross. When UNHCR and OPM were still having issues, Red Cross stepped in. World Food Program. The Danish Refugee Council gave some money to my people. The host communities were affected. So the challenge is not the refugees, because the refugees have been coming since 1990, Rwanda refugees, up to now. And the Nyakabande camp has become a transit camp of significance, because it is almost all the time having refugees. But up to now, government has refused to recognize it as a special center, not just a settlement, a transit camp. So what is coming now?
What's the difference? Special center, transit camp?
Now, there are two types of settlements in terms of management of refugees. When refugees come into a country, there are areas where they are held temporarily, as they are prepared to go to permanent settlements. For example, Kisoro, Nyakabande, is a place called transit camp. But the permanent camps are in Changwari, in Sinjuro there, and all those places.
In other words, at the transit camp, that is where the verification is done.
Exactly, cleaning up. Actually, the transit camp of Kisoro is like a washroom for refugees. By the time they leave Kisoro, they are clean and organized, and that cleaning leaves my people impoverished. That is what I want to leave as a message. People of Kisoro are bearing the brunt. We are not creating wealth anymore. and we may be sluggish in achieving our goals. I hear OPM is going to rate it's mandated also to rate how local governments are performing. Local government of Kisoro is likely to perform poorly because of refugee issue. So what I'm saying is that if these refugees were brought in the country and handled well, because another thing is the rights of refugees, which I see in Nyakabande is very dear. Frankly speaking, when we went to remove refugees in Chibaya and places around the Mopaka.
Let's first focus on the people in Kisoro, the ones you're saying are unable to achieve their own wealth because of the challenges created by the transitory mechanisms for refugees, before we come to the plight of those
the
in another settlement.
Okay, let's start with host communities.
Yeah.
A host community is as you know, of Kisoro is like any other Ugandan who has no school fees for the child, who is struggling with getting social services which are not available properly, and I'm sorry to accuse myself as government, who is struggling to take the child to school, who is trying to create a food security in a small piece of garden, and lo and behold, a flock of people comes and occupy the garden, occupy the home, occupy everything. So there is no breathing space. And what I expected is that Office of the Prime Minister could treat that one as any other disaster, like disasters of Mbare, disasters of Kasese, where people are overwhelmed by the human form of disaster, who are flocking like these locusts. When we had locusts, we said let's fumigate, we rushed there. But when we have humans in the form of large numbers, I can't say in form of that one.
No, I understand what you're saying.
OPM has really not helped people of Kisoro, and the government has abandoned us in terms of response to what refugees have done to the people of Kisoro. That is people. You know, people of Fumbira are very hospitable. They are very religious. But they are overstretched to a level now that they are silently trying to say, government, where are you? Okay.
Joshua Mukisa, Mr. Bizimana is a very conflicted man right now, because as district chairperson, he's fronting policies and rollout of frameworks that are supposed to help the refugees coming into the country. While at the same time, as a local government leader, he has to fight for the well-being of the people that are the host communities. It's a very tight position he's in right now. How best are the sector players working to ensure that there is harmony, first of all? But he also spoke about the fact, you haven't given us any very critical facts on why UNHCR and OPM are
of course, if you come
fighting
to
each other?
Now, because of management of refugee being now an issue, why? Because government wants security of the people. UNHCR is struggling to get enough resources to give the refugees as they go. So, and also there is a tendency of UNHCR trying to work alone. There are other humanitarian workers getting money from all over the world outside UNHCR that would want to help. But because it is the class monitor of every other humanitarian worker, it is gagging other partners to work.
Help us wade through what is no doubt very confusing and troubled waters here.
So what we need is to rethink the way the refugee crisis is handled.
Okay.
The UNHCR, in its promulgation, its creation, was mainly dealing with a small section of the refugee crisis, then Europe.
Yeah.
And right now, we have it expanding its scope to cover the globe.
Yeah.
But this has not come with an increment in the budgetary allotments by the member states. So it previously had a budget of about $300,000 US. Currently, it's up to $8.4 billion. But we have over 250 million migrants, if you call it. Not looking at the forced migrants, but we're looking at both collectively.
Yeah, collectively.
So the UNHCR, in its ever-widening mandate, has to deal with them because we had recently the creation of the International Organization for Migration, and now we have issues like climate change, which are also being incorporated into some of the causes of forced migration and the movements that are happening. With this kind of setup, it is impossible for governments and the UNHCR to operate effectively. Because one, the UNHCR has to get approval, authorization from the government in which it wants to conduct its business. Now, governments as well have to ensure that they're protecting themselves from any forms of democratic manipulation that will come either through some of these international organizations. That's why in about 2 years ago, the Uganda government closed a number of refugee NGOs and civil society organizations.
That is under DGF.
Yes, DGF and numerous others.
Yeah.
Because they were getting funding and the government could not clearly identify where the money was going to. Was it dealing with the refugees? Was it being utilized for other responsibilities? And now, with this kind of antagonistic forces present, you find that it is impossible for the UNHCR to operate freely in the countries in which it has been directed by the United Nations. And you find that the government can also not just simply give it leeway, because historically, the UN has failed to deal with major conflict. During the massacres of the Hutus, we see during the DRC conflict, we see what is happening in Syria. Most of the time, they have just kept quiet while these massacres were going on. So you find that the issue of goodwill and trust between this organization and the government is not at its best.
Okay, let's keep it at a policy level for another few minutes, or just one before you come in. But it seems to be itching.
Yes, something itching.
Yeah.
We should know that UN was formed because of war. So refugees and UN are inseparable. You remember very well that it was Britain, it was Britain, it was USSR who were the winners of World War II that formed UN against Germany, Italy, and Japan. So the UN creation was a war prevention from the winners.
Yeah.
So UN and UNHCR are supposed to manage war effects on people. But a challenge we have, UNHCR, though he says that it is challenged, UNHCR also can create its own sets of rules which are outside the frameworks, because it is the monitor, it is the UN. But we have also seen UN flaws where they are mishandling issues of refugees, yet they are the people mandated to protect refugees under the human rights and the UNHCR law and the Convention of 1951, I said, and the protocol.
Okay.
So the problem is UNHCR also and the UN can mismanage refugees.
How? Tell us exactly what they're doing or what you are aware of. Some funds haven't reached you. Some structures haven't been built as planned.
That's why I wanted now to bring the plight of refugees.
Yeah.
Imagine refugees run away and they come to the country. Then you, as UNHCR, you start taking them away to safety. And at a certain point, a call from Kampala says, don't lift any more refugees. And we have talked about refugees are women and children with their few belongings. That order, which was made yesterday but one, that don't again pick refugees from the border to Nyakamande, was unfortunate. Another unfortunate issue is recent activity of dismantling shelters of Nyakamande as a way of chasing refugees from Kisoro, so they either choose to go to the settlement camps or go back home. And to me, that one gives them no choice. If you see a piece of fish running from water to land, it means the water is a problem, because that is where the life is all the time. So people, they were about to 70% decided to go back What means that if you run away from a gun and you find that going to the settlement is worse than going back to a gun, it means there is a problem in the settlement. So instead of fixing settlement issues, they are fixing humans by making them uncomfortable. Imagine you are a child and a mother in a roof of a camp, gazetted in a district, and you see people coming to remove the roof. And then rain comes, starts soaking your small things, and you are left to think about boarding the next bus or going back home.
Interesting there.
I would like
Joshua
to
Mukisa, just give us what is no doubt a wrap, because we have to go for a live broadcast from one of our colleagues who is on the ground. That is Stephen Mbide. How do we move forward from this? No doubt it's a quagmire. How do we move forward?
So what we need currently is for states, member states of the United Nations, to hold another meeting of the General Assembly and amend some of the regulations providing for refugees, the Refugee Convention, and also to adjust the manner of financing of refugees, because you find it is provided in earmarked funds, unearmarked funds, aggressively earmarked funds. Now, the states in the global north have these funds aggressively earmarked to further protect the interests and causes that they find are worthy of them. That's why you see a lot of funds are allocated to the Ukraine, to the crisis in Europe. But then when you come to DRC, it is a forgotten conflict.
Exactly.
The issues taking place in Uganda, in Africa, are not considered very important or vital.
That's it. Refugee UNHCR was not meant for Africans.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much. Thank you very much. This conversation looks like it cannot end even if we gave it more than 3 hours. What I know is that it can always be kept alive on other platforms and, of course, other engagements. I'd like to thank you, Mr. Ebo Bizimana, for making time, as well as Joshua Mukisa for sharing perspective and insights on the refugee crisis in the Western Uganda. Stephen Mbide, a very good morning. What's on the ground?